The summer heat punished the small town of Clearwater Springs, Montana, where even the late afternoons offered no respite. Riverbend Ranch, owned by the Reed family for 3 generations, stretched across acres of land cut by the Crystal Creek that snaked between pastures parched by the drought. Jake, a 7-year-old boy with sun-kissed skin and eyes as bright as blueberries, ran barefoot along the riverbank, defying his mother's call from minutes before, summoning him for a bath before dinner. The hypnotic sound of water rushing over smooth stones was irresistible to the young adventurer. That specific stretch of the creek, where small rapids formed and where he could sometimes spot silver minnows gliding between submerged branches, was his secret refuge. Just 5 more minutes, he whispered to himself, calculating how much time he had left before his mother would come looking for him, as had happened many times before. Jake had no idea that the bank where he stood had been dangerously compromised by the heavy rain that had fallen during the previous night, turning the seemingly solid ground into a treacherous trap. The ranch was in a state of commotion since early morning. Eleanor Reed, Jake's grandmother and the family matriarch, had arranged for the arrival of Max, a 9-year-old German shepherd, a veteran of the search and rescue unit who was now part of a rehabilitation program for retired service dogs. This animal saved more than 15 people in the Colorado landslides, Sergeant Miller had explained when delivering Max to the family's care. But after the last operation, we realized it was time for him to rest. He deserves a peaceful retirement. Eleanor, known in the region for her love of animals and for running a small sanctuary for rescued creatures within the ranch, hadn't hesitated to receive this special guest. What she hadn't expected was the resistance from her son Mason, Jake's father, who thought the ranch already had too many animals to care for in times of financial crisis. "Mom, you need to understand that we're not in a position to support another pet, especially one this size," he had argued during breakfast, while Max settled under the shade of a sprawling oak tree near the main house. Emma, Mason's wife, tried to mediate the situation as she always did. A teacher at the only rural school in the region, she had a gift for appeasing tensions, especially between her mother-in-law and her husband, whose strong personalities frequently collided. "Mason, think about it. This dog could be great company for Jake. You know how much he loves animals," she argued, pouring more coffee for her husband. "Besides, the program covers part of the food costs for the first year." The argument seemed to temporarily calm Mason, but everyone in the house knew that the discussion was far from over. The ranch had been facing financial difficulties since the last cattle sale had been affected by unexpectedly low market prices. Debts were piling up, and the bank was beginning to pressure for overdue payments. To further complicate matters, Ethan, Mason's younger brother, had recently returned to the ranch after a decade's absence. His unexpected return had reignited old rivalries between the brothers and brought to light family secrets that everyone preferred to keep buried. Ethan was an agronomist and had innovative ideas to restore the ranch's productivity. But Mason, traditionalist and distrustful, resisted any suggestion from his brother. "You disappear for 10 years, and now you come back wanting to boss around. What's ours?" he had snapped during an argument the night before, causing Jake, who was playing on the porch, to run and hide in the kitchen, frightened by his father's shouts. Max, even though he had arrived just a few hours ago, was already showing a special affinity with the boy. When Jake approached him that afternoon, curious but cautious, the dog allowed him to stroke his black and golden fur. "He likes you," commented Eleanor, observing the interaction between the two. "Dogs like this have a sixth sense. They know how to recognize special people." The immediate connection between the boy and the dog didn't go unnoticed by Olivia, Ethan's daughter, who at 16 was dealing with her own conflicts from being brought to the ranch against her will. The teenager, accustomed to the busy life of Chicago, felt like a prisoner in this place where the internet signal barely reached, and where the only entertainment seemed to be watching the cattle grazing in the distance. Her relationship with her cousin Jake, however, was one of the few positive aspects of this forced change. "You're lucky, Squirt," she said, watching Jake play with Max. "At least someone here likes you." The words, said without real malice, hid the girl's own desire for belonging. Walter Thompson, the ranch foreman, a man of few words who had worked for the Reeds since Mason and Ethan were children, observed everything with attentive eyes. He knew that family like the back of his hand and sensed that Ethan's return, combined with the financial difficulties and the arrival of this special dog, would be the catalyst for old wounds to be reopened. "The Reeds have always had hot blood," he commented to his wife Martha, who worked in the kitchen of the main house. "And when that blood boils, it's better to be far away." What no one could have predicted was that same afternoon, while family tensions accumulated like storm clouds on the horizon, young Jake, in his solitary exploration along the banks of Crystal Creek, would take a misstep that would forever change the destiny of everyone at Riverbend Ranch. In a moment of distraction, enchanted by a school of small fish swimming near the shore, the boy felt the ground give way beneath his feet. There was no time to call for help. The sound of the fall was muffled by the noise of the running water. His arms flailed for a few seconds before the current, stronger than it appeared due to recent rains, dragged him to a deeper section of the creek. The icy water invaded his lungs as he desperately tried to stay afloat. A few yards away, under the shade of the oak tree, Max raised his ears. His instincts, honed by years of training, detected something that no human could perceive from a distance. In an impulse, the dog rose and dashed toward the creek, leaving behind the comfort of the shade. His body, though no longer possessing the vigor of youth, moved with precision and urgency, as if each muscle remembered exactly what to do in emergency situations. Max's barks echoed across the ranch as he ran toward the creek. Without hesitation, the dog launched himself into the water with a determination that defied his age. The current was stronger than normal due to recent rains, but years of training and rescue experience guided each movement of the animal. In seconds, Max located Jake, who was partially submerged, with one arm caught between two rocks. The boy had already lost consciousness, his small figure motionless against the turbulent water surrounding him. With surgical precision, the dog grabbed the boy's shirt between his teeth and began pulling him to the shore, fighting against the force of the water that tried to carry them both downstream. It was an extraordinary effort for an animal that many considered to be at the end of its useful life as a rescue dog. At the main house, Olivia was the first to notice the dog's absence. "Grandma, Max is gone," she commented to Eleanor, who was setting the table for afternoon tea. The matriarch didn't give it much importance initially. "He must be exploring the grounds, getting to know his new home," she responded, placing a basket of freshly baked cornbread on the embroidered tablecloth. Olivia, however, had a strange feeling. Since she was little, she had possessed what her mother called an acute sensitivity, an almost supernatural ability to sense problems. "I don't know, Grandma. He ran off like he heard something." Emma entered the kitchen at that moment, her face showing concern. "Has anyone seen Jake? I've called him several times and he doesn't answer." Olivia's eyes widened, the sudden connection between the two disappearances making her heart race. "The creek," she murmured, remembering how her cousin liked to play, near the water. "He must have gone to the creek and Max—" She didn't need to complete the sentence. In seconds, the three women were running out of the house calling for Mason and Ethan, who were arguing near the corral about the best way to handle the cattle during the drought. Meanwhile, on the bank of the creek, Max had finally managed to drag Jake onto solid ground. The effort had exhausted his strength, but instinct kept him alert. The dog began to lick the boy's face, an instinctive behavior aimed at stimulating him to breathe. His barks, now louder and rhythmic, were a clear call for help. Walter, who was checking the fence near the creek, was the first to hear. Years of working with animals had taught him to differentiate between various types of barking, and that one, without a doubt, was a call for help. The foreman ran in the direction of the sound, arriving at the bank of the creek to find the scene that would forever change the story of the Reed family. Jake, unconscious on the shore, wet and pale, with Max by his side, barking incessantly. "Dear God!" exclaimed the man kneeling beside the boy. With basic knowledge of first aid acquired after an accident with one of the workers years before, Walter turned Jake to his side, allowing water to escape from his lungs. The boy coughed weakly, a sign that he was still alive. Max, exhausted but vigilant, didn't move an inch away. "Help! I need help here!" shouted the foreman, his strong voice carried by the afternoon wind. Mason was the first to arrive, followed, closely by Ethan. Upon seeing his unconscious son, the father let out a cry that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. "My boy!" In seconds, he was beside Jake, taking him in his arms with a care that contrasted with his usual roughness. Emma arrived soon after, followed by Eleanor and Olivia. The mother's desperation was palpable, but years as a teacher in emergency situations had taught her to stay calm. "We need to take him to the hospital in Clearwater Springs right now," she said with surprising firmness, already checking her son's vital signs. "He's breathing, but he needs medical attention." While Mason carried Jake to the pickup truck, Ethan noticed Max, soaked and exhausted, observing everything with attentive eyes. It was Olivia who verbalized what everyone was beginning to realize. It was him, wasn't it? It was Max who saved Jake. Walter nodded, explaining what he had witnessed upon arriving. If it wasn't for this dog, the boy would have been carried away by the current. "I've never seen anything like it. He dragged him out of the water and was trying to revive him when I got here." Eleanor knelt beside the dog, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "You're a four-legged angel," she murmured, caressing the animal's wet fur. "A true angel." News of the rescue spread quickly across the ranch and soon reached town. While Jake received care at the small Clearwater Springs hospital, local residents began to gather, curious about what had happened. Dr. Mitchell, the physician, responsible for the care and a longtime friend of the Reed family, came out to speak with the parents after examining the boy. "He's going to be fine," he announced to everyone's relief. "He got here in time, a few more minutes submerged, and we could have been facing a much more serious situation." The doctor's tired eyes fixed intensely on Mason. "You were very lucky to have found him in time." Ethan, who had remained silent until then, stepped forward. "It wasn't luck, Doctor. It was Max, the dog that arrived at the ranch today. An ex-rescue dog from the fire department. He heard something that no one else heard and saved my nephew." The doctor raised his eyebrows, surprised. "That's an extraordinary story," he commented, adjusting his glasses on his nose. "I've known many cases of animals performing impressive feats, but this one is special." While the family waited at the hospital, Olivia remained at the ranch with Eleanor and Max. The teenager, who had always had difficulty expressing her emotions, found herself crying as she hugged the dog. "You're amazing," she whispered in the animal's ear. "Simply amazing." To her surprise, Eleanor made no comment about this unusual display of affection. Instead, the elderly woman sat down beside her granddaughter, putting an arm around her shoulders. "You know, Olivia, sometimes we need a scare to realize what really matters in life." The young girl nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her grandmother's words. Her relationship with her father's family had always been distant, especially after her father's estrangement. She had grown up hearing unflattering stories about the Reeds, filtered through her mother's bitterness after the difficult divorce. But now, in the face of Jake's near-tragic accident and Max's inexplicable heroism, something was beginning to change within her. The following morning, Jake returned to the ranch, still weak but conscious. His eyes lit up upon seeing Max, who couldn't contain himself upon recognizing the boy, licking his face enthusiastically while wagging his tail. "He didn't leave the porch all night," Martha told them, moved, "as if he was waiting for you to come back." What no one expected was the change in family dynamics that would follow. Mason, traditionally stubborn and inflexible, appeared visibly shaken. During breakfast, he approached his mother with a rarely seen humility. "You were right about the dog," he admitted, his voice choked with emotion. "If it wasn't for him—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. Everyone at the table understood what was left unsaid. Ethan, observing his brother's unusual vulnerability, saw an opportunity for reconciliation. "I think we all need to rethink our priorities," he commented, serving himself coffee, "and maybe work together to save this ranch, just like Max saved Jake." A significant silence settled at the table. It was the first time in years that the brothers seemed willing to call a truce in their Cold War. Eleanor exchanged a knowing look with Emma, both realizing that something profound had changed in the family dynamic. What no one knew yet was that Jake's rescue by Max would be just the first in a series of events that would reveal long-buried secrets in the Reed family history, secrets that dated back to the time when Ethan left the ranch. and that now, with his return and the providential arrival of that extraordinary dog, would finally begin to come to light. 1 week after the incident at the creek, the routine at Riverbend Ranch had completely transformed. Max, previously seen as an unnecessary burden by Mason, was now treated as an honorary member of the family. Mason himself had installed a special bed for the dog on the porch, close to Jake's room, and every morning he was seen personally bringing premium dog food to the animal. "I never thought I'd see my father so soft over a dog," Olivia commented to Emma, as the two harvested vegetables from the garden. The teacher smiled, adjusting the straw hat that protected her from the strong sun. "Your uncle has always been a soft-hearted man disguised as a tough guy. He just needed something to break that shell." Olivia was still trying to get used to calling Mason uncle. For most of her life, he had been nothing more than a distant name, often mentioned with resentment by her father. Now, observing him interact with Jake and Max, she saw a side of him she had never imagined existed. The arrival of Sergeant Miller, responsible for Max's retirement, brought even more commotion to the ranch. He had come to monitor the dog's adaptation, but upon hearing about the rescue, he became visibly moved. Max was always exceptional, even by search and rescue standards, he explained, as everyone gathered in the living room. But what he did here, this is something rare even for a rescue dog in their prime, let alone an animal of retirement age. The military man, a tall man with impeccable posture, brought with him a photo album documenting Max's career. The family gathered around him, fascinated by images of the dog in various rescue operations. This one was during the mudslide in Denver 5 years ago. He pointed to a photo where Max, younger and wearing the official search and rescue vest, was guiding teams through debris. He found a 3-year-old child who had been buried for almost 30 hours. Jake, seated on his mother's lap, observed the photos with almost religious admiration. Since the accident, he hadn't separated from Max, even insisting that the dog sleep in his room. "He's a real hero," murmured the boy, stroking the fur of the dog resting at his feet. Sergeant Miller nodded seriously. "Yes, he is. And you know, what's most interesting? Max has a special connection with children. It's almost as if he has a sixth sense for locating them." It was at this moment that something unexpected happened. Eleanor, who had been observing the conversation in silence, let out a broken sigh. All eyes turned to the matriarch, who suddenly seemed pale. "Are you all right, Mom?" asked Mason, concerned. The elderly woman made a vague gesture with her hand. I am. It's just that this story reminded me of something that happened many years ago." Ethan, who had been keeping a bit apart from the group, approached with interest. "What story, Mom?" The atmosphere in the room subtly changed. Olivia, always sensitive to emotional variations, sensed that something important was about to be revealed. Eleanor hesitated, as if assessing whether or not she should proceed. Finally, after a long sigh, the matriarch began to speak. "It was more than 30 years ago when you two were still children," she said, looking at her sons. "There was a similar accident at the same creek." Mason frowned, confused. "I don't remember anything like that, Mom." "You don't remember because you were in town with your father that day," Eleanor responded. "But Ethan was here." All eyes turned to the agronomist, who seemed as surprised as the others. "Me? But I don't remember any accident at the creek either." Eleanor smiled sadly. "You were only 4 years old, son. It's natural that you don't remember, but it was you who fell into the creek that day." A stunned silence took over the room. Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief. "Me? I fell into the same creek as Jake." The matriarch nodded slowly. "Yes, and do you know who saved you? A German shepherd named Duke, who belonged to the old ranch foreman, Walter's father." Walter himself, who was entering the room at that moment carrying a tray with coffee, stopped abruptly. "Are you talking about Duke, my father's dog?" Eleanor confirmed with a nod. "Exactly. Duke saved Ethan the same way Max saved Jake. It was like seeing the same scene replay 30 years later." The revelation provoked a whirlwind of contradictory emotions in Ethan. Fragments of long-suppressed memories began to emerge. The sensation of cold water, the panic of not being able to breathe, the rough touch of a canine tongue on his face. "Why did you never tell me this?" he asked, his voice trembling. Your father thought it was better not to talk about it, explained Eleanor. He was afraid you would develop a fear of water. And then, well, then things got complicated between you two, and the subject never came up again. Mason, visibly disturbed by the revelation, rose from his chair. So that's why Dad was always so protective of Ethan? Because of this accident? The question hung in the air, laden with decades of poorly resolved resentment. Mason had always felt that his younger brother received preferential treatment from their father, and this revelation seemed to confirm his suspicions. Eleanor sighed deeply. Your father was a complex man, Mason. He loved you both, but in different ways. After the accident, he became obsessed with the idea that Ethan was fragile and needed special protection. Sergeant Miller, sensing the emotional weight of the conversation, made a motion to withdraw, but Eleanor stopped him with a gesture. Please stay. There's more to Duke's story, and I think you can help us understand something important. Intrigued, the military man nodded and sat back down. Olivia, observing the scene with fascination, noticed that Max had stood up and positioned himself next to Ethan, as if perceiving his emotional agitation. The dog rested his head on the agronomist's leg, looking at him with those expressive eyes that seemed to contain ancestral wisdom. Ethan, unconsciously, began to stroke the animal's head. Eleanor continued her narrative, then revealing what no one expected. Duke wasn't an ordinary dog. He had been trained for disaster rescue just like Max. Walter's father received him from a friend who worked with emergency management in Denver. Walter nodded, confirming. That's true. My father always said Duke was a special dog, that he had saved many lives before coming to the ranch. A shiver ran down Emma's spine. Are you saying it's not a coincidence? That somehow history repeated itself? Eleanor looked directly at Sergeant Miller. Do you believe in intertwined destinies? Sergeant, in paths that cross not by chance but for some greater purpose? The military man, normally pragmatic, seemed momentarily disconcerted by the question. Well, ma'am, I've seen too many things in my career to dismiss any possibility. Animals like Max sometimes demonstrate capabilities that defy purely rational explanations. It was at this moment that Walter, who had remained silent absorbing the conversation, stepped forward. There's something you don't know, he said, placing the tray on the side table. Something my father told me before he passed. All eyes turned to the foreman. Duke didn't come to the ranch by chance. It was your father who brought him, Mrs. Reed. Mr. Joseph personally went to Denver to get him, after dreaming 3 nights in a row about one of his grandsons drowning in the creek. The revelation fell like a bomb on those present. Joseph Reed, Mason and Ethan's father, who had passed more than 15 years ago, had always been known for his pragmatism and disbelief in superstitions. The idea of him acting based on a premonitory dream was almost inconceivable. My father? Are you sure about this, Walter? Asked Mason, incredulous. The foreman nodded firmly. Absolutely. My father and yours were confidants. Mr. Joseph told him about the dreams and asked for help finding a rescue dog. It was my father who put him in contact with the friend from emergency management. Ethan, who was absorbing every word with growing astonishment, suddenly made the connection that everyone feared to verbalize. And now Max appears 30 years later, just in time to save my nephew from the same fate I almost had. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake, until then quiet on his mother's lap, was the one who broke it. Did Grandpa send him to save me? He asked with the innocence of his age. Eleanor smiled, her eyes watery. Who knows, my little one? The world has mysteries that we can't explain. Mason, always the most skeptical in the family, seemed to be fighting against his own convictions. This is crazy, he murmured, but without his usual conviction. Pure coincidence. Emma, however, saw the situation from another angle. Whether coincidences or destiny, one thing is clear. This family has a special connection with this place, with this creek, and now with Max. Olivia, who was watching everything with growing fascination, realized that something profound had changed in the family dynamic. The secrets revealed that afternoon were not limited to Ethan's childhood accident or his grandfather's premonitions. There was something more, something that pulsed between the lines of conversations. In the looks exchanged between her father and her uncle, in the way Eleanor seemed simultaneously relieved and apprehensive. The teenager then had the certainty that they were just beginning to unravel the mysteries surrounding the Reed family and Riverbend Ranch, and that Max, in some inexplicable way, was the key to all of them. News of Jake's heroic rescue by Max spread rapidly throughout Clearwater Springs. In a small town where news traveled at the speed of wind, the story of the retired dog who rescued the boy in the same creek where another family member had nearly been lost 3 decades earlier took on legendary proportions. On the Sunday following the incident, Pastor Wilson dedicated part of his sermon to divine providence manifested through animals, a clear reference to what had happened at Riverbend Ranch. The Reed family, traditionally discreet, suddenly found themselves at the center of the community's attention. People who barely greeted Mason at the general store now stopped to talk, asking about Jake and Max. Invitations to dinners and social events, previously rare, began to arrive. For Olivia, the sudden notoriety was strange. She had grown up in Chicago, where anonymity was the rule, not the exception. Now she couldn't go to the bakery without someone recognizing her as the Reed niece from the family with the hero dog. "How do you stand it?" she asked Jake during a walk through the central square, where once again they were approached by curious onlookers. The boy shrugged, already accustomed to the attention. "I like it. People bring treats for Max." For the little one, the simplicity of childhood made everything easier. His relationship with the dog strengthened each day, creating a bond that bordered on symbiosis. Max didn't stray from the boy, following him around the ranch like a protective shadow. Mayor Robert Wilson of Clearwater Springs saw in the story a political opportunity. In an election year, nothing like associating his image with an event that moved the entire town. His visit to Riverbend Ranch, accompanied by the culture secretary and a photographer from the local newspaper, was received with distrust by Mason, but with calculated cordiality by Ethan. "We're thinking of creating an annual event in honor of rescue animals," announced the mayor, while posing next to Max for photographs. "And we would like your family to be the honorees of the first edition." While Mason murmured something about cheap politics, Ethan saw an opportunity in the proposal. Trained in agronomy and with experience in agricultural marketing acquired during his years in Chicago, he perceived a chance to revitalize Riverbend Ranch's image. "It would be an honor, Mayor," he responded diplomatically. "In fact, we're implementing an educational rural tourism project here at the ranch. Perhaps we could link the initiatives." The mention of the project, until then just a vague idea, discussed between Ethan and Olivia, caught Mason by surprise. His face stiffened, but he remained silent as his brother elaborated plans that had never been discussed as a family. Emma, sensing the growing tension, skillfully intervened, inviting everyone for coffee on the porch. When the visitors finally departed, the storm that had been forming inside Mason exploded. "Who do you think you are to make decisions about the ranch without consulting me?" he vociferated, facing his brother. "After 10 years away, you think you can come back and boss around what's mine?" Ethan, who had expected this reaction, remained calm. "The ranch isn't just yours, Mason. It never was. It belongs to our family, and that includes me and Olivia." The brothers stared at each other like bulls ready for combat. It was Eleanor, who intervened, her voice surprisingly firm for a woman her age. "Enough, you two are like children fighting over a toy. Sit down now." The tone allowed no argument. Even Mason, accustomed to challenging authorities, retreated at his mother's command. Max, who was observing the scene attentively, positioned himself between the brothers, as if trying to mediate the conflict. Jake, frightened by the argument, ran to the dog's side, seeking comfort in his soft fur. "Look what you're doing," Emma pointed out, indicating her son huddled next to the animal. "Is this what you want to teach him? That family means fighting." Shame momentarily silenced the men. Taking advantage of the pause, Eleanor took the reins of the situation. "We're going to resolve this now. Everyone to the dining room table, including you, Olivia. Here it's time to lay the cards on the table." The family meeting that followed was tense. Seated around the maple table that had witnessed generations of Sunday lunches and important decisions, the Reeds finally confronted the elephant in the room. Why had Ethan really left the ranch 10 years ago? and why had he chosen to return precisely now? "It wasn't by choice that I left," Ethan began, facing his older brother. "You know that better than anyone, Mason." The rancher looked away, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Olivia. "What does that mean?" asked the teenager, feeling she was about to discover something crucial about the father she thought she knew so well. Ethan took a deep breath before continuing. "Your uncle and I had a serious disagreement at the time. It involved the future of the ranch, but also—" He hesitated, looking at Emma. "It also involved personal matters." The teacher paled slightly, confirming Olivia's suspicions that there was much more to this story than simple fraternal rivalry. "What personal matters?" insisted the young woman. It was Mason who answered, surprising everyone. "I was engaged to your mother before she met your father," he revealed, his voice laden with contained emotion. "Sarah and I dated for 3 years before Ethan returned from college." The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia looked from her uncle to her father, trying to process the bombshell information. "Mom, and you?" she stammered to Mason. "But how?" Ethan interrupted, taking his part in the story. "I didn't know about their relationship when I came back. I had lost touch with the family during my college years in Chicago. When I met Sarah again at the Harvest Festival." He let the sentence die, but the meaning was clear. "You fell in love," completed Eleanor, her voice carrying an old sadness. "And she broke off the engagement with Mason." Olivia felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Throughout her life, she had heard only her mother's version, that she had met Ethan in Chicago, where they both studied, and that his family had never fully accepted her. She had never mentioned a previous relationship with Mason, much less a broken engagement. "Why did Mom never tell me this?" she asked, more to herself than to the others. "Probably for the same reason I never told you," answered Mason with bitterness. "Some wounds are too deep to be reopened." Emma, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Is that why you've always been so hard on Olivia? Because of what happened between you, Ethan, and Sarah?" The question, asked without accusation but with genuine curiosity, caught Mason off guard. He looked at his niece as if seeing her truly for the first time. He began, but couldn't continue. Jake, who had been playing quietly with Max in the corner of the room, approached his father, placing his small hand on his arm as if sensing his anguish. The simple gesture completely disarmed Mason. "No," he finally admitted. "That's not why. At first maybe it was, but after it was fear." "Fear?" asked Olivia, confused. "Fear of what?" "Of getting attached to you," confessed Mason, his voice choked. "Of loving you like I loved your mother and being abandoned again. So I kept my distance. I was cold. I convinced myself it was best for everyone." Ethan, visibly moved by his brother's confession, tried to reach him with words. "I should have fought harder for you to forgive me. I should have insisted on your right to know Olivia since she was little." "Why didn't you insist?" asked Eleanor, voicing the doubt that hung in the air. Ethan lowered his eyes, ashamed. "Pride. Guilt. And then, when Sarah decided to separate and distance me from everything that reminded her of the Reed family, I accepted. It as a form of punishment for what I had done to Mason." The revelation that it had been Sarah who orchestrated the complete estrangement surprised Olivia. The image she had of her mother, always so rational and fair, began to gain more complex nuances. "Is that why she was so furious when you decided to bring me here?" she asked her father. Ethan nodded slowly. "Your mother never completely got over what happened. The fact that I decided to return to the ranch after our separation was, for her, the final proof that I was always more of a Reed than she would have liked." The conversation continued for hours, revealing layer upon layer of resentments, misunderstandings, and secrets kept for decades. When they finally rose from the table, emotionally and physically exhausted, something had fundamentally changed in the family dynamic. It wasn't full reconciliation. Old wounds don't heal in a single night, but it was a beginning. For Olivia, the revelations of that night explained much about her childhood and about the turbulent relationship of her parents. For Mason and Ethan, they represented the possibility of a new relationship, built not on the past but on the present and future of Riverbend Ranch. Max, who had remained silently vigilant throughout the conversation, seemed to understand the importance of the moment. When everyone retired to their respective beds, the dog did something unusual. Instead of following Jake to his room as was customary, he positioned himself in the hallway connecting Mason and Ethan's rooms, as if standing guard over the fragile truce newly established. The next morning, finding the animal there, Eleanor smiled to herself. "You really are special," she murmured, caressing the dog's head. "You came to save much more than one life, didn't you?" Max's intelligent eyes seemed to confirm, with a wisdom that transcended words. 3 months passed since the night of revelations. Riverbend Ranch, previously plagued by debts and discord, began to show signs of renewal. Ethan's innovative ideas for diversifying production, initially received with skepticism by Mason, proved effective. The implementation of sustainable agriculture techniques not only reduced costs, but also opened doors to premium markets that valued organic products. The educational rural tourism project, impulsively mentioned during the mayor's visit, had become a reality. On weekends, the ranch received groups of schools and families interested in learning about the agricultural production process and, of course, in meeting Max, who had become a local celebrity. "Who would have thought a dog would be our biggest tourist attraction?" joked Mason one morning, observing a group of children clustered around the dog in the central courtyard. Ethan smiled, noting how his brother had changed. The stubborn and bitter rancher had given way to a more open man, even capable of making occasional jokes. "It's not just any dog," he responded. "It's a certified hero." The relationship between the brothers, though still marked by moments of tension, had evolved into a functional partnership. Decisions about the ranch were now made together, with each contributing his specific skills. Mason with his deep knowledge of the land and animals, Ethan with his business vision and modern agricultural techniques. Olivia, who had initially planned to return to Chicago as soon as possible, surprised everyone by announcing she would complete high school in Clearwater Springs. "I've decided to stay," she informed during a family dinner, "at least until the end of the school year." Her relationship with Mason had undergone the most significant transformation. Her uncle, previously distant and cold, now treated her with awkward but genuine affection, as if trying to make up for the lost years. One afternoon, while helping Olivia with a biology paper on local ecosystems, he even commented on how she had the same perceptive eyes as Sarah, but the determination of the Reeds. For the teenager, it was the most significant compliment she had ever received. Jake flourished under the new family dynamic. The constant presence of his cousin and uncle had expanded his small world, bringing new perspectives and learnings. His connection with Max remained special, but now he proudly shared the dog with visitors to the ranch, explaining with childlike seriousness how Max had saved him, just like he saved my uncle when he was little. The dog, in turn, seemed to rejuvenate each day. Sergeant Miller, who visited regularly to monitor his adaptation, didn't hide his astonishment at Max's renewed vitality. "It's as if he found a new purpose," he commented during his last visit. Working animals like Max need that. A mission, a reason to exist. The Hero Animals Festival proposed by the mayor became the most anticipated event on the Clearwater Springs calendar. Scheduled to take place exactly 3 months after Jake's rescue, the celebration promised to attract visitors from throughout the region. The City Hall had commissioned a small bronze statue representing Max to be installed in the central square. For the Reed family, however, there was an even more important preparation underway: Sarah's visit. The news that Ethan's ex-wife would come to Clearwater Springs for the festival had fallen like a bomb on the ranch. Olivia had been the first to know through a call from her mother. "She wants to see with her own eyes if I'm really okay," the teenager explained to the family gathered on the porch. "And I think she's also curious about this whole story with Max." The prospect of meeting Sarah again after so many years clearly disturbed both Mason and Ethan. Emma, always the mediator, tried to calm the mood. "It's just a 2-day visit," she reminded them, "and it's important for Olivia to have her mother present at such a significant moment." Eleanor, in her silent wisdom, observed everything with attentive eyes. One afternoon, while knitting on the porch, she called Olivia to sit beside her. "Your mother was always a proud woman," she commented, her needles moving rhythmically in her wrinkled hands. "Very similar to my son's in that respect." Olivia nodded, surprised by the perceptive observation. "I think that's why it never worked out," she responded. "3 people too proud to yield." The elderly woman smiled. "Exactly. But you know what? I've learned in almost 80 years of life. Pride doesn't keep anyone warm on cold nights. It doesn't console when the heart aches. It doesn't build or preserve what really matters." The words stayed with Olivia, echoing in her mind as preparations for the festival and for her mother's arrival progressed. On the eve of the big day, an unexpected storm hit the region. Lightning cut across the night sky while rain lashed the roof of the main house on the ranch. Jake, frightened by the thunder, took refuge in his parents' room, Max faithfully by his side. Olivia found Ethan on the covered porch, observing nature's fury with a cup of coffee in his hands. "Can't sleep?" she asked, joining him. Her father shook his head. "Too much on my mind." They remained silent for a few minutes, just contemplating the rain falling in dense curtains over the pasture. "Are you nervous about seeing Mom tomorrow?" she finally asked. Ethan gave a melancholic smile. "It's complicated," he admitted. "Your mother and we have a lot of history." "Too much history, maybe," commented Olivia. "Sometimes I wonder if you two weren't so busy looking at the past that you forgot to build a future." The observation, too mature for someone her age, surprised Ethan. "When did you get so wise?" he asked, putting his arm around his daughter's shoulders. Olivia shrugged. "Maybe it's Grandma Eleanor's influence, or maybe I've learned some lessons seeing your mistakes." The morning of the festival dawned gloriously clear, as if the previous night's storm had washed away not only the earth, but also the apprehensions. The entire town was decorated for the occasion, with colorful banners and posters celebrating the four-legged hero and the miracle at Crystal Creek. The Reed family arrived early at the central square, where the statue would be unveiled. Max, wearing a special vest created for the occasion, seemed to understand his importance in the event, maintaining himself with dignity beside Jake. It was Olivia who first spotted her mother in the crowd. Sarah Brooks remained as elegant as ever, with her dark hair impeccably arranged and an erect posture that defied anyone to question her authority. Upon seeing her daughter, her normally composed face lit up with a genuine smile. "Mom?" exclaimed Olivia, running to hug her. The reunion between mother and daughter moved those present. When they finally separated from the prolonged embrace, Sarah found herself face to face with the past she had tried so hard to avoid. Ethan and Mason Reed, side by side, observing her with indecipherable expressions. The moment everyone feared. The first meeting between the three after so many years ended up being remarkably anticlimactic. There were no heated recriminations or dramatic scenes. Instead, 3 adults who had once deeply hurt each other exchanged polite greetings like strangers meeting at a social function. "Are you well?" Sarah asked Ethan after the initial greetings. The question, simple but laden with implicit meanings, hung in the air for a few seconds. "I am," he finally answered. "Better than I've been in a long time, actually." Something in the sincere tone of the response seemed to disarm Sarah. "I'm happy to hear that," she said, and for the first time in years she really seemed sincere. The statue unveiling ceremony was brief but moving. The mayor spoke about courage and loyalty, values represented by Max. Jake was invited to pull the cord that would reveal the work, with the dog faithfully by his side. When the cloth fell, revealing the beautiful bronze sculpture that perfectly captured the animal's nobility, applause echoed through the square. It was during the reception that followed, held in the town hall, that the real miracle happened. While Olivia was showing her mother photographs of the ranch on her cell phone, Jake approached Sarah timidly. "Are you the older Olivia?" he asked with the disconcerting frankness of children. The question drew laughter from all present, definitively, breaking the ice. "I'm her mother," answered Sarah, kneeling to be at the boy's height. "And you must be the famous Jake, the boy Max saved." The little one nodded solemnly. "He also saved Uncle Ethan when he was small like me," he informed, repeating the story he had heard many times. "Grandma said it was destiny." The mention of Destiny made Sarah raise her eyes to Mason, who was observing the scene a few steps away. For a brief moment, something indefinable passed between them. Not the old love, certainly, but perhaps a mutual recognition that time had transformed them both. "Would you like to meet Max?" asked Jake, extending his hand to Sarah. The woman hesitated only for a second before accepting the invitation. She allowed herself to be guided by the boy to where the dog was resting, attentively observing the crowd. The meeting between Sarah and Max was almost mystical. The dog, normally reserved with strangers, immediately stood up and approached the woman, looking her directly in the eyes as if assessing her. Then, to everyone's amazement, he gently placed his paw on Sarah's knee. "He never does that," murmured Ethan, impressed. "He must like you." The animal's simple gesture seemed to touch Sarah deeply. She stroked the dog's silky fur, her eyes suddenly watery. "Thank you," she whispered to Max. "Thank you for saving that boy." Only Olivia, positioned close enough, understood that her mother wasn't referring only to Jake, but also to Ethan, saved decades earlier by another German shepherd. That night, after the festival, Sarah surprised everyone by accepting the invitation to dine at Riverbend Ranch. Seated at the table of the family that had once almost been hers, she seemed less tense, less defensive. She listened with genuine interest about the innovations implemented by Ethan and Mason, asked perceptive questions about the rural tourism project, and even exchanged recipes for homemade desserts with Eleanor. When Olivia accompanied her to the guest room, she couldn't resist asking, "What happened to you today, Mom? You're so different." Sarah smiled, a tired but sincere smile. "Maybe I'm just tired of carrying so much resentment," she admitted. "Or maybe it's this ranch. There's something about this place that seems to put things in perspective." The following morning, before departing, Sarah had a long private conversation with Mason on the porch. No one knew exactly what was said, but when they returned, both seemed lighter, as if an invisible weight had been removed from their shoulders. "I think we finally made peace with the past," Mason commented to Ethan later, as they watched Sarah's car disappear down the road leading to town. 2 weeks after the festival, an official letter from the bank arrived at the ranch. The loan requested for expanding the rural tourism project and implementing new agricultural techniques had been approved. Riverbend Ranch was officially on the path to financial recovery. "I think we need to celebrate," announced Eleanor during dinner. "A new phase deserves to be properly celebrated." The celebration, held the following weekend, gathered not only the family but also friends, employees, and neighbors. In a symbolic gesture, Mason and Ethan together planted a young oak tree near Crystal Creek at the exact spot where Max had saved Jake. "So that we always remember that sometimes we need to lose something to really value it," said Mason, surprising everyone with the unusual philosophical depth. Olivia, observing the scene beside Emma, felt a peace she had never experienced before. "It's strange," she commented. "I spent my entire life hearing stories about how the Reeds were difficult, complicated, stubborn, and now looking at all of you, I can only see a family. Imperfect, with scars, but still a family." Emma smiled, putting her arm around her niece's shoulders. "Sometimes it takes a miracle to remind us of what really matters." And there he was, the four-legged miracle, lying peacefully under the shade of an oak tree, observing the family he had helped reunite. Max, the dog who had come to save much more than one life. He had come to save bonds that seemed irreparably broken, to heal wounds that time had failed to heal. Jake, seated beside the dog, was animatedly telling him his plans for the approaching school vacation. "And we'll swim in the creek every day," he promised, completely oblivious to the irony of his words. "But only in the shallow part, I promise." As the sun set on the horizon, tinting the fields of Riverbend Ranch with gold, Olivia took a photograph of the scene, her father and her uncle side by side, planting the tree that symbolized a new beginning, her grandmother smiling with pride, Emma and Jake laughing at some joke, and Max vigilant and serene, fulfilling the destiny that had brought him there. Years later, when someone asked Olivia about the exact moment her life changed, she would show this photograph and say, It was when a dog taught us that family isn't just about blood ties, but about choosing to stay, about forgiving, about starting over. It was when we realized that sometimes you need to almost lose something precious to understand its true value. The changes at Riverbend Ranch continued to unfold in unexpected ways in the months that followed. The rural tourism project, once just a desperate attempt to generate additional income, had transformed the property's dynamics. Families from surrounding counties, and even from as far as Denver, made reservations to spend weekends experiencing ranch life, learning about sustainable agriculture, and of course, meeting the famous Max. The hero dog experience, as Mason had dubbed it with unexpected marketing flair, became the cornerstone of their tourism offering. Children especially loved hearing Jake tell the story of his rescue, which grew more elaborate with each retelling. Max sensed I was in danger from 3 miles away, the boy would proclaim to wide-eyed visitors, while the German Shepherd sat patiently beside him, somehow seeming to understand the importance of his role in these narratives. The additional income allowed the brothers to implement Ethan's innovative agricultural practices more broadly. They converted a significant portion of the ranch to organic production, installed solar panels to reduce energy costs, and implemented a sophisticated water management system that made them more resilient to drought, a growing concern in the region. Clearwater Springs itself was experiencing a small renaissance, partly due to the attention brought by Max's story. The tourism overflow from the ranch benefited local businesses, and Mayor Wilson, who had indeed won his re-election, partly riding the wave of the Hero Animals Festival's success, was quick to capitalize on this newfound prosperity. "We should really thank that dog for revitalizing our local economy," he joked during a town meeting, though everyone recognized the kernel of truth in his statement. Perhaps the most remarkable transformation, however, was in the family relationships. Olivia, who had once counted the days until she could escape back to Chicago, now found herself fully integrated into ranch life. She had developed a special bond with Emma, who recognized in the teenager not just intelligence but a natural talent for teaching. Under her aunt's mentorship, Olivia had started helping with the educational components of the tourist visits, explaining environmental conservation principles to visitors with a passion that surprised even herself. Her relationship with Mason had evolved into something neither could have imagined. The gruff uncle who once could barely look her in the eye now sought her opinion on ranch matters, respected her insight, and occasionally even showed an awkward but genuine affection. One evening, after a particularly successful day hosting a school group, he had awkwardly handed her a small package. "Saw this in town," he mumbled. "Thought you might like it." Inside was a silver pendant shaped like a German Shepherd. Thank you for her contributions to the family business, but more importantly, a recognition of her place in the family. Sarah, too, had undergone a transformation. After her visit for the festival, the lines of communication that had been severed for years slowly reopened. Her weekly calls with Olivia evolved to include occasional conversations with Eleanor and, even remarkably, civil exchanges with Ethan about their daughter's future. When Olivia's birthday approached in late autumn, Sarah's announcement that she would drive down for the celebration was met with nervous anticipation rather than dread. "She's even bringing her famous apple pie," Olivia told Jake, who had developed an almost comical hero worship of his cool Chicago aunt after she had sent him a model airplane kit just because. The weekend of Sarah's visit coincided with the first significant snowfall of the season. Crystal Creek, where so much of the family's story had unfolded, was rimmed with ice, its waters dark against the white landscape. Ethan stood on the porch, watching the snowflakes dance in the early morning light when he heard the crunch of footsteps behind him. "Some things never change," said Sarah, wrapping her coat tighter around herself as she joined him. "You always were the first one up." Ethan smiled, offering her a steaming mug of coffee. "Ranch habits die hard. Though I admit I had trouble sleeping last night." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the snow transform the landscape. "I'm glad you came," Ethan finally said. "For Olivia, but also, I'm just glad you're here." Sarah nodded, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. I almost didn't. Old habits, you know? But then I thought about Max and Duke before him, and how sometimes the universe gives us second chances in the most unexpected ways. She paused, sipping her coffee. I don't believe in fate, Ethan, but I believe in making choices, and I'm choosing to let go of the past. Later that day, as the family gathered in the warm kitchen to prepare Olivia's birthday dinner, an unusual harmony prevailed. Eleanor and Sarah worked side by side, rolling out pie crust, exchanging recipes, and gentle barbs with the ease of old friends. Mason and Ethan argued good-naturedly about the proper way to season the roast, while Emma orchestrated the whole operation with her characteristic calm efficiency. Jake and Olivia sat at the kitchen table, ostensibly making place cards for dinner, but mostly sneaking treats to Max, who had positioned himself strategically between the two most likely to share food. Walter and Martha had joined them too, the longtime employees now so integrated into the family that no celebration would be complete without them. "We need a photo," announced Eleanor suddenly. "Everyone, to the living room." They arranged themselves before the fireplace, the traditional spot for family photographs. As Emma set the timer on the camera and rushed to join them, there was a moment of uncertainty. Where should Sarah stand? Without hesitation, Mason made space between himself and Ethan, gesturing for her to join them. It was a simple action, but one loaded with meaning. Acknowledgement that regardless of the past, she was part of this story, part of this family. As the camera flashed, capturing the moment, Olivia realized something profound. The family standing together wasn't perfect. They had hurt each other, made mistakes, let pride and stubbornness nearly destroy what mattered most. But they had also found the courage to change, to forgive, to build something new from the broken pieces of the past. And it had taken a dog, 2 dogs, across 2 generations, to show them the way. That night, after the dishes were cleared and the last piece of birthday cake consumed, Olivia found herself alone on the porch with Max. The German Shepherd, now officially a senior dog but still regal in bearing, leaned against her leg as they gazed at the star-filled Montana sky. "You know, for someone who doesn't talk, you've taught us an awful lot," she whispered, running her fingers through his thick fur. In response, Max simply looked up at her with those wise, understanding eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe. The bond between them, between this extraordinary animal and the family he had helped heal, was beyond explanation, and all the more precious for it. As spring returned to Riverbend Ranch, bringing with it new growth and possibility, the Reed family continued to evolve and strengthen. The scars remained, as scars do, but they had become part of a larger story of resilience and redemption. And at the heart of that story was a simple truth, that sometimes healing comes from the most unexpected sources, and love in its purest form needs no words to transform lives. Whenever visitors to the ranch asked about the bronze statue of Max that now stood proudly at the entrance, the family would share their tale of the hero dog who saved not just a boy from drowning, but an entire family from drowning in their own bitter history. Some called it coincidence, others destiny. But the Reeds knew it for what it was, a second chance, a gift to be cherished and honored by living each day with the same courage, loyalty, and unconditional love that their 4-legged guardian had shown them. In Clearwater Springs, the legend of Max would be told for generations, inspiring other families to find their way back to each other, to remember that what binds us together is stronger than what pulls us apart. For what Max had truly rescued wasn't just Jake from the rushing waters, or even the ranch from financial ruin. It was the heart of a family, the connections between them that had nearly been lost to time and pride, rediscovered through the